Hello and welcome back to Life as a Scale Model. As you can see, we're starting a brand new model today. We're going to be building the refit of the NX-01 that was supposed to have appeared in Season 5 of Star Trek Enterprise. Unfortunately, that show got cancelled. But lucky for us Trekkies, the ship got canonized in Season 3 of Star Trek Picard. So we're going to build it because it's a canon Enterprise, and that's kind of the point of this series. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of official documentation about this ship, so we're going to have to rely a lot on these internet photos that I found. And if you're going to build this particular model, you're going to want to find your own sources for looking at how it's painted and what your base color might be, and get an idea of how you want to design it. Let's take a look at our instructions. As you can see, round 2 really kind of did a halfway job on this one, and that's unfortunate because this is a slightly more complex model than what we did with the original NX-01. Now, taking a look at our sprue, you can see that it's fairly similar to what we had with the other NX-01. We've got our saucer section, we've got slightly longer warp pylons, and new for this kit, they've included an altogether separate engineering hull that we will build up and use to put everything together. So I took a minute here, if you're wondering why there's such a long pause, to really examine the instructions and get an idea of how AMT intended everything to get put together. And then I just took a look at what was on the sprue and tried to make the best decision I could as to what I should start removing first. And I ultimately decided to go with the saucer section first, because that seemed like the easiest thing to put together. And if you haven't done this already with your model, I recommend that you take it to your kitchen or your bathroom or whatever before you remove anything and give it a good wash in some warm soapy water just to get those release agents off. So we're going to start here with the snippers, and we're just going to very carefully snip those parts off the sprue. And since I couldn't get my snippers in there, I decided, you know what, to heck with it. I'm just going to use my my hobby knife. This is a valid way of removing pieces from the sprue. However, I must caution you that if you are going to attempt this, make sure that you have proper control of the blade at all times. Because if you get in there and you've not got good control over the blade, there's a possibility that you could cut into the model, or worse still, that you could cut into yourself. And even though I may never find out about that, I would feel very bad if my advice led to you cutting yourself. So please use extreme caution if you're going to use your hobby knife to remove your model pieces from the sprue. One of the advantages you can see of using the model knife is as I cut the pieces off the sprue, I can examine them for any leftover material that may not belong, and I can remove that material right on the spot. It does speed up the process a little bit, but again, it's also pretty difficult to do without potentially damaging the pieces if you're not experienced. So if you don't feel comfortable, just stick with those model snippers and you will be just fine. Now again, I'm consulting the instructions because if you couldn't tell before, they are not great. We're going back to the snippers here because this is a straight line cut, and I figured that would just be quicker and easier, and more importantly safer than trying to use my hobby knife to cut this piece out. And so there we go. We've got our 3 saucer section pieces, I guess 4 saucer section pieces that we need cut off the sprue. And now I'm just going to grab my pieces and lay them out so that I can see everything I have. And I'm going to grab my model cement and we'll get those put together. I'm inspecting for flash and any excess material that might still be on the model so that I can get that off before I glue it together. You can see in that little saucer recessed area I found some, so I'm just going to quickly sand that down with my hobby file and just trying to save myself a little work down the road. And we'll do the same on the top half of the saucer just for kicks and giggles. And I'm just going to make sure that those areas on the back of the warp nacelle booms are properly filed as well, so that they can be as nice looking as possible before I actually start putting this together. And now I think we are ready for the hobby cement. Perhaps not. This is a good time to talk about OCD and model building. I think model building tends to attract a certain kind of mind that is very detail oriented. And sometimes it's hard to let go of that initial compulsion to try to make everything perfect. But if we try to make everything perfect in model building, we're just never going to get it done. And done is better than perfect. So if you're finding yourself struggling with the need to have everything be absolutely perfect, just tell yourself over and over again, done is better than perfect. So now we will use our model cement and we'll start gluing pieces in place. And will they fit a little bit better after I use my hobby knife on that rounded area? I don't know. But if you feel compelled to try to make everything absolutely perfect before you glue it together, well, you do you. So we'll glue those booms into the bottom half of the saucer. And then we're going to turn around and focus on the front, or the top half of the saucer. We're just going to grab our little deflector dish. And I saw an area there where things weren't trimmed quite as close as they could be, and I was afraid that it wouldn't fit properly if I didn't trim it. So I did a little fine trimming there just to be sure that that piece would fit properly. Now I'm going to take just a least little bit of model cement and we're going to slot that piece into place on the top half of the saucer. Just like that. Easy peasy. Next I'm going to take my model cement. I'm going to put some cement on those pegs that slide into the top half of the saucer to help hold those two pieces together. And once I've finished with the pegs, I'm going to go back again and I'm going to fairly generously apply model cement around the edges of the saucer rim. I noticed with the original NX that these areas had a hard time fitting together flush, and I ended up having to go back and use my model cement brush to kind of weasel in some extra model cement and then use clamps to hold the two halves together to really get a proper fit. And it worked out okay. You may end up finding yourself doing that as well, and that's not a big deal. If you have to go back and button some things up after the fact, that's not a big deal. Just be aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it, and take your time, and you will also get great results, just like I do when you're building these little rascals. So I'm trying to avoid having to use clamps by just squeezing the heck out of that to get a good solid connection and a good solid bond between those two pieces. Spoiler! It didn't really save me any time. I still ended up finding some places where the saucer halves didn't line up just right, and I still went back and used my clamps and my model cement to make sure that I got a really good connection between those two halves of the saucer. But that's okay. The important part of that is that we got everything done properly. Now we're gonna come across a little thing here that is going to become a big thing later. It's a cautionary tale for you, the audience, in making sure that you are extremely keen in inspecting your pieces before you put your model together. So you can see me cutting the top parts of that warp nacelle boom area off the sprue, and one of them jumped away and tried to get away. And now, as I've said is important, I'm going back and I'm looking for any excess plastic that I don't think should be there. And I ran into a slight issue with this one. One of the halves I didn't quite trim all the way, and it caused some rather surprising and also rather undesirable results in the fitment of the overall model. I couldn't get the nacelles to line up properly. I couldn't get the pylons to slot properly, and there were gaps that I knew shouldn't be there, and it ended up being just a teeny tiny little piece of plastic that wasn't supposed to be there from the injection point. But I didn't catch it the first time around, and I ended up trying to just cut it away while it was still all put together. But you'll see my solution here in just a few minutes as we round third and get closer to getting this model fully put together. But I can't stress enough, always make sure that you inspect your pieces really, really carefully before you start putting them on the model, especially if you're gluing. Because if there's anything there that's not supposed to be there, it's going to throw everything else out of whack. So now I feel like, okay, I've got these suckers trimmed pretty good. It's time to go ahead and get them glued down to the model. As you notice, I even went ahead and dry fit them to make sure they would fit okay, and I didn't notice any problems. And I was just, when I finally got down to the bottom of what was going on, I was just absolutely floored at how tiny this little piece was that was causing so much havoc with the alignment and the fitment of my model. It happens to the best of us. So just be diligent and just pay really close attention and be thorough, and you will be okay. You can see I had a little trouble getting those things lined up, but once I got them lined up on the pegs, that one went in just fine. And here's my boo-boo. I put down that glue. I said, oh, well, if the other one fit fine, then this one will fit fine, right? Oh boy. Boy, was I wrong. You can see me trying to fiddle with the front end of that thing. So I'm looking at it, I'm like, it's just not a tight enough fit. Why is it not fitting tight? And I could see my hobby mat. And here I go trying to, I finally noticed it. I'm like, oh shoot, I've already glued. This is not good. And I'm just trying to carefully cut that extra plastic away. I was not at all successful. It was good enough. Until it wasn't. We'll cover the until it wasn't here in just a little bit. So we got the top part put together. We got our what the designers would call the primary hull put together. Now we're going to go ahead and get those warp nacelles glued on. With the original NX-01, this wasn't such a bad thing because the nacelles are symmetrical. So if you put one pair of pieces that make up a nacelle on one side or the other, it really didn't matter. But with this model, you do need to pay close attention to which side of the ship you're putting the nacelles on, because they are actually designed to be specific to one side of the ship or the other. The reason for that being, when Doug Drexler did the redesign, he took some of the warp chiller grills that were on the outsides of the nacelles and cover them over with a flat spot, which then got some extra livery. You can see that in a lot of the pictures and CG models that people have made over the years. And so if you don't have those flat areas facing the outside of the ship, then you won't be able to put the livery on properly. So keep that in mind as you're building this one, so you don't accidentally put those nacelles on the opposite side than where they're supposed to go. Just very slowly, very carefully, cut things away from the sprue. If you're using the knife, be careful to not put your fingers where they might get sliced. And here I go again, just cutting extra plastic off that just doesn't need to be there. I learned from the last model that when it comes to the nacelle caps and the Bassard collectors, I need to be really careful with how I cut things around that area. And that was actually one of my motivations for using the hobby knife over the snippers, because I felt like I'd be able to get in and get a cleaner cut on the nacelles using the hobby knife than if I was using the hobby snippers. Whichever route you go, though, just be careful to not cut more plastic off than is needed, and just be conscientious of trying to maintain the shape that was designed to be in that area. Once again, we're just going to use that model cement and get those two pieces glued together. And since I learned last time that things didn't want to stay fit together the way they're supposed to, I just went ahead and squeezed the heck out of that, just to be sure that I got a good tight fit and a good tight bond between the two halves of that nacelle. And I got a little model cement on me. That is just the thing that happens. Now here I see there's a little extra flash on the pegs that hold the nacelle in place. It may not have been a big deal if I didn't take it off, but I figured I could, just remove it with my thumbnail, so I did. I'm just looking at the instructions to make sure that I'm putting the nacelle on the proper side of the model, and subconsciously I'm also trying to squeeze the thing together even firmer so that I get a really, really tight bond with that glue. I had to check to see which pieces I'd use before I felt confident enough to go ahead and take the plunge and glue that nacelle onto that pylon. Because while it's not impossible to remove pieces that we've glued together, it can be a bit of a hassle. And I try to make my modeling experience as hassle-free as I possibly can, because that's what keeps it fun for me. I got a little model cement where it wasn't supposed to go. I had hoped I could scrape it off with my thumb, but when we go back to clean things up, we're definitely going to go back and do some sanding to get some of that excess model cement off the model. I'm looking to see how the nacelles align, and I'm looking to see if everything looks kosher to my eye. Nacelles can be tough because you need to align them so that they run parallel with the beam of the ship, but you also want to make sure that they stand up in the position they're supposed to stand up, so that they don't look like they're drooping to one side or the other. So be thorough when you're checking that out. It can take some time, but if you're thorough and you're persistent about it, then it should turn out okay. I nicked my little nacelle spur there, little antenna thing. We'll see how that turns out when we finally put the thing in paint. I get that other half of the nacelle cut out, and we'll remove the extra flash and plastic from that, and then we'll get that other nacelle put on. One thing I did realize putting this model together that I didn't realize putting the other model together is that there is a little bit of give in the pegs that attach the nacelles to the rest of the model. And so if you don't feel like the nacelles are standing up quite straight enough, there's a little wiggle room to twist them back and forth and get them aligned the way you want them aligned. And so I did pay particular attention to that this time around, since I realized that was an option. And I wanted my nacelles to be as straight and as proper looking as I could possibly get them. Now I'm just going back with my model glue, and I'm putting a fairly generous amount of model glue on the nacelle half, making sure that I get model glue all the way up and down the entire length of that thing so that it will all stick together and hold together properly. And now I'm just going to squeeze those suckers together real tight and try to get the best bond out of them I can get. You can see my fingers turning white. So I'm pushing so hard. I was just like, I don't want to fill any gaps. There are going to be things that we all like about building models, and there are going to be things that we all don't like about building models. And as you get experience behind you, you're going to start to learn what the things are that you like and don't like, and you're going to start to devise ways that you can do more of what you do like and avoid doing what you don't. And I certainly am not a fan of filling gaps. I know it is a necessary evil, but it is just not my favorite part of building models. I find it tedious and time consuming and oftentimes frustrating, but it has to be done. So you can see there where I was tweaking the nacelle ever so slightly, and now I'm really just fiddling with the alignment to make sure that everything aligns up properly, and tweaking that nacelle and the other one just to make sure that they stand up straight, and also being perturbed by model glue that is now on my hands. So now we got the primary hull done, we're going to move on to that secondary hull. And there are some things that we want to pay particular attention to during this step. Right here you can see I'm cutting off another deflector dish, because one interesting design choice that Doug Drexler made with this NX refit was the choice to have two deflector dishes, one for the saucer and one for the engineering hull. So we don't want to forget about our little deflector dish for the engineering hull, because if we do, our model won't look quite right. Once again, I'm just trying to remove some flash here and there to have the smoothest piece I can have before I actually get to gluing things together. And now I'm just going to carefully remove that other half of the secondary hull there. I'd like to take a moment and talk about color. One of the things that I have been grappling with this particular model is what color I would like to paint things. I've seen some folks who have built this in 1/1000 scale who used white as a base coat, or deck tan, some sort of light color that almost approaches the colors we might use on the original series Enterprise. And I think that's great, but in my head canon, for the last who knows how many years, can't remember, since Doug Drexler sprung this little thing on the world, the ship has always been the same basic color scheme that the original NX-01 was. So when we get to our next video where we clean things up and fill gaps and do the base coat, I am actually going to reuse the titanium silver that I used on the original NX-01. To me, that's just how the NX-01 is supposed to appear. Now I'm pointing out here that there are little holes for the neck that connects the saucer to the engineering hull, and I had some flash in mine, so I used my hobby knife kind of as a drill to just get that excess flash out of that hole so that it wouldn't impede my ability to get the whole model glued together. Now, another thing that I grappled with was the idea of building this in subassemblies, because when I finally got the whole thing together, I realized, ooh, there are some really tight spaces that I'm going to have to spray. But ultimately, I ended up deciding to just go ahead and assemble the thing in full before I spray it. Simply because I realized, well, I've got my turntable and I've got some ways of putting it on a stick, so that should give me a bit better access to all those little recessed areas. I didn't think it would be too much more trouble to just put it together all the way, as opposed to trying to do it in subsections. So there I finally got everything put together to my satisfaction. And I just decided, oh, well, there's a little bit of flash in that little circular area where that deflector dish is going to go. So let's make sure that our deflector dish fits properly before we start throwing things together. But now I'm confident enough to commit to putting down the glue and putting everything in place. If you have trouble getting that deflector in that slot with your fingers, which I did, then feel free to use tweezers or forceps or whatever to get that piece into place. My fingers are not as nimble as they used to be. Fortunately, I got it in place without any major trouble, but it could be a problem for you if you're not thinking about it as you put everything together. And I actually did knock it out of place ever so slightly as I was trying to get the two halves of the engineering section put together here. But fortunately, once I got it all snapped together, everything just kind of fell into place. So that was an unintentional win on my part. Now the final part to put in place is the neck. And I just went ahead and I dry fit it to make sure that it would fit okay, and I found some flash that was making it fit a little less well than I had liked, so I just removed that real quick so that that peg could just slide easily into that hole. And with all of that trimmed, I had to get one of my hairs off the thing, and then I was ready to put some model glue down and get that neck glued to the engineering hull. Yeah, it gave me a little trouble. It wanted to twist around. And again, I just gave it a lot of pressure to make sure that it got a good solid bond. And I'm looking for any obviously noticeable flash. And now I'm going to go ahead and dry fit the saucer section to the engineering section. And one thing I realized, they say this is a snap kit, that you don't need glue, but there's not really anything holding the warp pylons in place. And you can see I'm fiddling with them, and it's because they weren't quite lining up with the slots that they molded into the engineering section where the nacelle pylons are supposed to slot in and just sit. It sat okay, but I wasn't 100% happy with it, even though I'm going to give it my thumbs up of approval. That was as good as I could get it for now. Oh, what did I do? Well, let me tell you. It's going to be okay. Uh, Sometimes you have to break things in order to make them better. So you can see I just snapped the booms with the warp nacelles and the pylons off the back of the ship. And I'm pointing out those little slots. Those little slots are the key to everything. This was my bravery test, and I just kind of took it and ran with it. So I could not, for the life of me, get those pieces to align with those slots the way I needed them to, and it was driving me crazy. And after I got everything pulled apart, I was able to properly get excess that excess plastic off that boom piece. And as you can see, what I'm doing right now is I'm dry fitting and fiddling and trying to figure out if there's really any downside to just gluing the warp pylon straight to the engineering hull before I glue the saucer onto the neck. And I ultimately decided there wasn't. So even though what little instructions we have don't say you should put it together this way, we're officially freestyling it. And so what I did is I put some model glue down. There is a little recessed area where that slots in so it won't have any lateral play, but I just put glue down everywhere where I saw a surface that would make contact, and I just glued that pylon straight onto that engineering section. And so now I'm just going to let it sit for a sec. I really like the way that lined up, hence the thumbs up of approval there. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and do another dry fit on that other pylon and nacelle to make sure that I can get my pieces together the way that I want. And having done it with the other one already, it was a little easier to accomplish with the second one. So I'm just going to take my shaky hand. I don't know why my hands were so shaky here, but I'm just going to take my shaky hand and put down some glue, and then I'm just going to press those pieces together to get good contact and let that glue set up for a second so that I will have a good solid bond. And so that's our lesson from this model, at least one of probably many so far. Sometimes in order to make something great, we have to break it first. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you can see my alignment all around is quite a bit better than it was originally. I was a lot more happy with it. But that's what happens when you don't pay close attention to all the excess plastic on your parts. Every once in a while, you just make a lot more work for yourself because you weren't paying close attention to begin with. So let that be a lesson to you now. Pay close attention to what you're doing and what's on your pieces. Here I'm just using the file to rough up that surface to give it plenty of surface area for the glue to settle in and give me a bond. Again, I don't know why my hands are so shaky right now. Probably there was a little bit of adrenaline from, oh shoot, I just broke this model that I only have one of. If that's your concern, fear not. If you don't get a model together to your satisfaction, then it can just become a donor for spare parts or for a kit bash. There are a lot of things you can do with models that you goof on. But now I'm diligently dry fitting, and I'm trying to see what kind of finagling I'm going to have to do in order to get everything lined up the way I want. And there was certainly a lot of frustration here because there's an area under the saucer where the neck doesn't quite meet the saucer section, and we're probably going to end up filling that with putty as we prep the model for paint. But mostly I was worried about how well everything was going to line up along the beam of the ship. Because when you have a starship model like this where the nacelles droop or the saucer droops and it doesn't all look straight, it can really uh, make your day not so good. So now I'm just going to carefully put some model glue on the saucer peg so I can put the saucer on the neck. Notice I haven't done anything with the booms for the pylons yet. I wanted to get the saucer in place first so that it would be a little bit more durable and rigid before I started fiddling with those warp nacelle booms. And then what I had to do is I just kind of had to flex the model and create kind of a vice grip out of what I was doing with my hands, and I just flexed it and held it together for as long as I could in order to get it aligned and fit as closely as I could get it. I'm just inspecting, and you can see I'm very, very carefully and just little bits by little bits moving pieces to try to get the best alignment that I can possibly get. Got a little glue where it wasn't supposed to go, so we're going to have to sand that off later. This is going to be a messy build. And this is kind of what I was saying in the introduction to the project, is they say these are beginner kits, but most of them seem to have quirks that make them not especially beginner friendly. However, just be diligent, take your time, and they, even though they can be a little difficult, they're still a lot of fun. I love building these little 2500 scale model kits. So now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, we've now got the alignment and all the pieces put together as well as I can possibly get them. And that's going to do it for today. We are going to move on. Thanks for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe. Have a blessed day, and until I see you again, happy modeling.